Have you ever walked down a street and noticed windows bricked up and wondered why? Well, I've come to Bath today to find out, and there's an interesting reason behind it. Let's go. As is usual, to find out the reason for these things, you have to dive back into history, and in this particular case, you've got to go back quite a long way. Back, in fact, to 1696 and the reign of King William III and the introduction of the hated window tax. Even here on the corner of affluent Queen Square and Gage Street, there are windows bricked in. These windows are often bricked up in a way that could be unbricked and reglazed if ever the tax was repealed. This is the house belonging to Beau Nash, the self-proclaimed King of Bath, and even he's got windows missing. How about that then? Here on the corner of Queen's Parade, every single window at the end of this building was boarded up. And yet again, here on the corner of George Street, we see more windows removed. Here you can see in one of the large circles that they've only used windows at the ends of the block so as not to spoil the panorama of the main crescents. As can be seen here, all of the windows in the main circle are intact. Back then there were plans to introduce income tax, but these were very controversial. Nobody wanted to disclose how much they earned to the government, so they had to come up with something else. In fact, income tax wasn't introduced until 1842 and remained really controversial until the 20th century. So, the idea behind window tax was fairly simple. The more money you had, the bigger the house was. The bigger the house was, the more windows it had. So the more windows it had, the more tax you paid. People hated it. Here, as was often the case in fashionable Bath, the windows to be removed were at the end of terraces, where they would have the least amount of visual impact. And it didn't matter where you were, even the rich took windows away. Just a little way down there is the Crescent, one of the most fashionable parts of the town. And here, even at the very end of the Royal Crescent itself, can be seen blind windows, proving that even the most influential in society were bricking up their windows to save on the tax. When introduced in 1696, the tax consisted of two parts. There was a flat rate of 2 shillings that everybody had to pay. That was regardless of how many windows you had, it didn't really matter. And then there was a charge for the windows. If you had between 10 and 14 windows, there was an additional fee of 4 shillings levied. And if you were impervious enough to have between 15 and 20, then that doubled. And if you had more than 20, then you were going to pay 8 shillings. That's a lot of money. And so obviously people didn't want to pay that amount of money. Then after 1709 and the Union of Scotland, a new top tier was added. If you had more than 30 windows, it was 2 shillings. Then in 1747, it all changed again. They suspended the 2 shillings flat rate, which everybody paid, and they separated that off as a separate tax. Then they got to work on how much you got charged per window. If you now have a house with 10 to 14 windows, it's 6p a window. If you've got between 15 and 19 windows, then you're going to be paying 9p per window. And if you're rich enough to have more than 20 windows, Then for you, my son, it's a shilling a window. Certain rooms were exempt. For example, if you had a dairy, or you made cheese, or you had a milk parlour, they were exempt. And so often you would find a lintel into the room with the names of those rooms carved into it as an excuse not to pay, but whether they got away with it, I actually don't know. The tax was very unpopular. It was seen both in the press and nationally as a tax on the very daylight and air itself. For many householders, the only way around this was to board up your windows, because if they were bricked up, you couldn't be charged tax on them. And so that is what they did. You can clearly see here where these windows have been bricked up. Another knock-on effect was the production of glass. Between 1810 and 1815, the production of glass remained the same. And this is despite the fact in that same period this country was undergoing its biggest housing boom in its entire history. So you can imagine houses were being built with a lot less glass. Another side effect brought about by the inadequate lighting and ventilation was outbreaks of smallpox, cholera and typhus. And it was these that led to the outcry of the winter of 1850 and 1851, which eventually led the following July to the removal of this tax in July 1851. So as I wander along the blind window encrusted streets of Bath here, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this short history. I hope it gave you an idea of why these things exist. And they're everywhere. I mean, it wasn't just here in Bath, they were all across England, Scotland, Wales, even France had them as well. In fact, France had them until the early 20s. So it wasn't just here, it was kind of all over the place. But it is amazing the effect it's had on the architecture, and you don't notice it, or you walk past it, or you think, well, I wonder what that is. Well, now you know. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you'll see us on the next one, wherever that is, whenever it is. But we'll be there, and I want you to be there too. So for now, bye-bye.